Unlearn is back on our stages. The production Unlearning Still is crafted and performed by MoMo Matsunyane under the direction of Khutjo Green. It tells the story of Angel Mojapelo, a young woman who battles depression and anxiety. She uses stand-up comedy as her refuge. Now, for more insights, we are joined by actor, playwright and director MoMo Matsunyane. MoMo, thank you so much for joining us. A very good evening to you. Now, Unlearning Still took a 5-year hiatus. But just for those who were unable to witness it 5 years ago, just share with us the inspiration behind the play and what motivated you to explore some of the challenging and often stigmatized topics that exist within this theatre piece.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm very grateful to be here. So Unlearn, I started writing it around 2017, 2018. It was the height of the hashtag Me Too movement. And I just couldn't for the life of me understand why men don't like us. Why are they so brutal? Why is it okay when we are, surrounded by people who are meant to be our protectors, but yet we fall prey to the very hands as victims of sexual or violence or violent abuse, rather. And so I began, kind of penning down some poems, short stories, and later, in 2019, that's when I decided to officially just string all these thoughts together and create this play called Unlearn. I was trying to understand whether it's possible to inherit toxic behaviors and where might it stem from that this violence is so prevalent in our lives, and why is it so okay? Some thoughts and ideas kind of really rooted back to the ideas of colonization, the stripping away from the black man, from the black family unit, leaving homes with just women, and then raising these other young men with no model or male kind of role model to look up to. And what kind of men does the society breed and feed, right? Of course, there are those who, based on research, are born, kind of lack of void of empathy, if one can put it. But other things are learned behaviors and come from resentment and anger and pent up resentment, particularly towards either their own mothers, whether we watch documentaries, and that's where we learn that some of these patterns come from. And so I decided to create the show of this young lady. And of course, a lot of it is also inspired by my own personal stories and a lot of stories that other young women are also facing and experiencing. And I decided to explore what it might be like for this young lady who is navigating this divorce of her parents, in which she witnessed her father violently beating her mother for many, many years, and eventually using the stand-up comedy as a way to express these feelings. And of course, she's, experiencing and living with anxiety and depression and taking medication for it, and how that affects one's behavior. And one day, unfortunately, she attends a party and ends up being sexually abused. And so I really was just trying to get to how can we as a society, through the stand-up comedy sets that I do in the show, how do we begin to unlearn this behavior? And how do we become a better people?
I mean, these are such interesting topics, Momo, but what I really want to know is that in the first run of the play, were you able to find that the audience you were able to challenge some of the societal norms, spark conversations, and just provoke introspection among them with regarding to these toxic behaviors that you speak of, the mental health stigmas, as well as the sexual abuse?
Yes, absolutely. So because of the nature of the heaviness of the play, what we decided to do 5 years ago was that each show had to be accompanied by a Q&A session, which was carefully facilitated, through which we got the opportunity to open up questions to the audience and for them to directly interrogate the work, but also interrogate themselves. And we also got to ask them questions about what the process was like and what was it like, and could they identify bits of themselves in some of the characters that I play, right? Because this is not also just a we are bashing men kind of play. I play different kinds of men. the men who want to protect us, the men who do the calling out. But then there's also like the sick and apathetic characters who quite frankly don't understand even the nature of rape culture in its vast dimensions. And it was so interesting and so important for those conversations to be had. And it was really beautiful to have a lot of parents even identifying with some of the things that my characters' parents were going through, the violence in their relationships, how their divorce impacts their children, and how even as young people, a lot of the young people in the audience also could relate a lot with Angel's struggle with keeping it together in a world that is so fast paced, in a world that needs you and requires you to constantly be functioning at 100. But what happens when you can't? What happens when you can barely get out of bed and you're feeling the drudgery and the fear and the anxiety that each day is bringing, right? And whether you're being successful. And we know nowadays, with the spike of social media, particularly amongst younger people, there's almost like an urgency to be successful very, very young, and so these also feed into the mental illnesses that we're experiencing as a society. And we found that 5 years ago it was so important for those conversations to happen. And it's so almost tragic that 5 years later that there's still this huge need. And that's why we're doing the work again, pending or rather as a response to the invite that the Market Theatre Laboratory extended to us to be a part of the Women's Month celebrations at the theatre. And more than anything, it was about us being able to use our voices as young Black women to reflect, but also to say, how are we still unlearning the same things, and how differently can this play impact a different generation of people?
And that's very important. I think that was going to be my next question to you, to say, just seeing that you're able to bring this back 5 years later, but we're still having the same conversations. Talk to us maybe just about the challenges that you encounter in bringing these complex and multifaceted themes to life. But most importantly, how do you then work with your cast, your crew, and just the creative team to create a safe space and a collaborative environment for exploring and portraying the nuances, especially of toxic behavior as well as sexual abuse?
Right. So, as an arts practitioner, I'm in my 20th year as an artist. And when I look at the palette of my work over the years, a lot of it really is centered around the Black female-centered narrative, the Black condition, the Black female body as a site of violence. And these are important issues for me to address, and I've been doing it through my work. But also, I'm such a huge lover of comedy, because I believe that, comedy and tragedy are siblings, and you can't do one without the other, right? And there's a saying that we laugh because it's too sad to cry, right? So I believe that using comedy is a safe way to make people comfortable, particularly the audience, to get them to a space where, they let their guard down. And then just as they're a little comfortable, then that's when you begin to really hit them with the things that the work you want to address hits them with. I've been very fortunate in my career to work with people who are like-minded in thought, and ideas and vision, and working with Khutjo Green. So I'm the writer and performer of Unlearn. So this particular work of mine is a very small crew, and I'm being directed by Khutjo Green, who is an incredible actor, but also such a caring and loving director, and she holds space for me. And like I mentioned earlier, because a lot of these things are also personal, and those who come and watch the show, I mean, the lead's name is Angel, which is my second name. And so this is not a story that I've just kind of, thumb sucked, but the experience and its history lives within my body as well. And so there are moments in rehearsal where I do break down. There are moments when it gets a little too close to home, but I also believe that part of the job of art is to provide a space where people can heal together, and grow and interrogate and unpack and critically analyze the issues that are being discussed. So it is very difficult, but because we are also trained facilitators, we are also trained in what we do. We went to school for these things, so we know through certain exercises how to kind of distance oneself from the process and the work, so that when I do it, I'm not necessarily constantly labored with the pain of it all, but rather using that opportunity as a moment to shed.
And it's always so special when an authentic story is told by the owner of that story. It just resonates a lot differently with the audience. In a very digitized world, how do you see the role of theatre and storytelling in promoting social change and fostering empathy and encouraging dialogue around such difficult topics? Are you finding that more and more people are still relying on theatre, and most especially the audiences that you want to reach?
I find that post-COVID, there's almost like a hunger for live interaction, which so what we're noticing is like this huge burst of interest and attraction towards live performance, which makes sense, right? We were separated from one another for many months. And particularly for those of us who work in the theater, it was very difficult, very painful, to not be able to work, because at the end of the day, this is how we make a living, right? So to not have been able to make money during that time was terribly painful. And we all went through existential crises and wondering, like, what am I doing here if I'm not doing art or live performance, right?
Right.
But thank goodness that we managed to move past that as a society, despite the fact that, I mean, now there's a whole, there's mpox and a whole bunch of other stuff that's still kind of looming. But we are now in a space where we can manage and navigate around those things. What we did see, though, was the need to connect with people very differently. I think the theater has played a big role in this country. And I think we can't deny, even historically, the role that it played in contributing to the liberation of our people, during apartheid. But what we are also realizing is the need for the digitization, right? So I am also involved in some other projects, like a company called She Shakes Her Spear, in which we are exploring classic Shakespearean texts and sharing those online and on YouTube, and people are responding very well. And I find that with a work like Unlearning Still, I mean, it's most impactful when it's live, because there's nothing like a live visceral experience of a theatrical performance. But also other things that we've managed to do is record live performances and sharing them with like schools. There's a project I did like maybe 2 years ago, where I co-wrote it with a wonderful lady called Nondumiso Msimang, called Siriti. And that was commissioned specifically for school children. And we shot that on the stage in the theater, and that was distributed to many schools and has been touring digitally for that long. So there's nothing like the stage, there's nothing like live performance, but I think we are finding different ways. I know I had a conversation with the artistic director of the State Theatre, in which he's, there's talks. I don't even think I'm allowed to speak about this, but like there are creative ways that are coming up that theatre makers are realizing need to be available quickly and accessible, so that larger audiences who cannot afford to come to the theatre, or rather even just prefer streaming from their homes, how do we bring our work closer to them? So we are exploring those alternative ways of connecting.
Speaking of alternative ways of connecting, any possibilities of this piece of work finding expression on a global stage anytime soon?
Very soon. One of the greatest things, I mean, really, like why we create our own work a lot of the times is because mainstream spaces can be so difficult to access, right? And so we begin to create our own work so that we can tour it ourselves. There's a wonderful gentleman who's a colleague and friend of mine called Tony Miyambo, who's currently touring in Edinburgh. And he's doing his play Kafka's Ape, which he's been working with Phala or Gidita Phala for many years. And when Unlearn started, when Kafka's Ape started, the purpose of these shows was so that we could tour the world. Unfortunately, Unlearn came out just as COVID was beginning, and so we only enjoyed 2 runs in South Africa. But that absolutely is the point. And so the show will be touring. I'm talking to some of my colleagues in Switzerland. we are working on it. We're going global, you know.
No, that's exciting to know. It's exciting to know. So before you go global, you are having that rerun at the Market Theatre. Talk to us about those dates and when people are able to see the play again.
Awesome. We will be running from next week, Thursday, the 22nd. We have two shows, one at 2 p.m. and at 7 p.m. on the 23rd at 7 p.m. And then our last show is on Sunday at 3 p.m. And tickets are available at web tickets. Or people can also buy them at the door at the Ramolao Magene Theatre, which is at the Market Theatre Laboratory.
And is there an age restriction?
Yes, there is an age restriction of 14, and audiences are warned that the subject matter may be triggering for some patrons.
All right, Momo, it was an absolute pleasure speaking to you. We certainly do hope that that rerun will be a success, but most importantly, that you reach those global stages. Thank you so much for your time this evening.